So if you're singing a song when you get on the elevator, that means it's your last memory when you come back. But if you're belting it out, do you start singing right where you left off? Like, I would walk 500 miles in the eye. Anyway, welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott C. And joining me once again on the severed floor, a goon I would never demand to devour feculence. It's Brian H. Hey, Brian.
You know, Scott C., we don't use that sort of language here at Lumen.
But at least I'm not using big... Oh, wait a minute. Did I? Speaking of big words, we are back once again to discuss the penultimate episode of Severance Season 2, also known as the 9th episode, but better known by its title, The After Hours. Well, if last week we got an episode that some might have felt we got too little, is it possible this week's episode gave us too much? I mean, outside of the spouses of Devin and Bert and maybe the crew at O&D, everyone else of any significance was touched upon in this episode. And while no one has no idea what the third season will have in store, it's possible that a couple of our refined storylines might not even reemerge in the season finale. Although I think we've all heard at this point that the last episode will be in the 76-minute range, that might lead one to believe maybe we have not seen the last of a couple of gentlemen that appeared at least to get a send-off in this episode. So, Brian, I'm going to chop this one up into, I'm going to say like 5, maybe unequal pieces. So let us start with what I would say was probably the most self-enclosed storyline in the entire episode. And that is the one dealing with, our friend Irving and his, maybe a friend, maybe not, Bert. So the Irving and Bert storyline. And it's no coincidence the storyline between the two most beloved actors in the cast, Turturro and Walken. It starts off with Irving arriving at home to find Bert is already there. That's one chunk. Then later we get the two of them driving with Radar, the dog, in the back seat. And then the final is Bert and Irving making their goodbyes at a train station. Because you know what? That's where all great romances that weren't meant to be often end, at train stations. Before Irving takes the train, presumably far, far away. Think about it. You can go classic movies, TV shows, train stations. There's always someone being left on a train, waving the train. Casablanca, he's left in the rain on the train,
I thought there was a great little contained story here. It was told quickly, but we start with the dog when he enters the apartment, and the dog is staring at something. I like the reveal, and the first thing we see is Bert is there dressed in all black.
Oh yes, that's right. And he's got that little notepad. May have participated as a low-level Lumen enforcer or goon. And he's like, when he says, and I want to ask you, that's why I'm bringing it up also, we never use words like that. With Lumen, it was very specific language. When Bert says we, does he mean both himself and Irving? Because we still don't really learn what Irving was at this time, because this would precede his time at MDR. You start to wonder if we will ever know at this point.
I took it as we meant the corporation Lumen, who has wonderful lengthened descriptions of things to avoid their true meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So I took it as that. But
the royal we?
Yeah, the royal we. But in the context of where this goes, it's more complicated than that. But I think Bert pretty much cops to having a very complicated backstory.
Absolutely. I mean, the first part of what he's reading is when he talks about having been connected to several recent disappearances or deaths. And the fact that he has 2 lines back to back where he kind of tries to dismiss that about, that was before. And then he follows that immediately with, go for a ride with me. Well, just going by what we've seen, and we, we were kind of aware of there being something up with Bert well before this. The surveillance duty he was doing on Irving before he even gave him the dinner invitation already made one think there's something more going on with Bert. It's not just natural curiosity. And it seems like this is something he might even have a little bit of experience or training doing to some extent.
Right.
And someone that Irving's notes refer to as an enforcer or goon, and they say something like, go for a ride with me. I mean, you don't have to have watched The Sopranos to know what that probably means. At least that's the way most would take it.
Well, my thought was, this played upon several pretty popular tropes of being driven to the train station. The last of which, and the most popular use of this in recent culture, was Yellowstone. Whenever they were going to take somebody to the train station, they were going to take them out and whack them. But, I had the thought of Pine Barrens, getting in the car and heading out into this desolate landscape that looks like New York or New Jersey. It had a Pine Barrens feel. And was, the thing we've talked about, a hint of menace. And there's a real conflicted look on Irving's face. But I think probably the subtext that this scene tells you is Bert is pretty much let him know that he's not safe. If he has access to what's in his notes and he's in his apartment, like him staying there, Lumen can get to him. If Bert can get to him, they can get to him. So regardless of whether he trusts Bert or not, he knows he can't stay there. He's not going to be safe anymore.
Right. So we shift to the car ride to the train station, as we mentioned, and you listen to the things that Bert says. He's talking about how he never hurt anyone, that he would drive people places. He didn't ask what happened to them once they got there. Now, Bert's explanation, it's the common refrain of those who never quite want to admit that they took part in something heinous. It's in the same vein as everything from I was only following orders to, I wasn't an active participant in murder, like when someone else in a stick-up gang popped somebody. I don't know. Although you always knew it was something bad, and it didn't take much of a leap to guess what that bad thing was, it was your way of being able to distance yourself from it. But the way he describes these things here, and something he's going to say in the next scene when they're at the train station, it does take you back to the dinner conversation they were having with his significant other, Fields, the John Noble character. And they talked about the reasoning why he went through the severance process, about the whole getting into heaven and you realize, oh, they're telling you right there that his Audi had been doing really bad things, to the extent where, because they have some religiosity about them, they're fearful he's not getting into heaven with the life that he's been leading. This might be his only path, that at least some part of his soul would make it there. So I thought that was really kind of it's a chilling kind of a moment, and it makes one really admire the fact that they had cast Christopher Walken in this part, because that role of someone who was an enforcer, who's done bad things, that's not a shocker to hear Christopher Walken taking that part. But everything we had been led to believe about his character, because of his innie version, was like, oh, this is a different kind of a role for Christopher Walken. It's, there's something kind of sweet about it, and kind of, not that he hasn't done things like that a little bit here and there, but then when we see the other side, it's like, oh, it makes the reveal kind of work that much better, I think, actually.
It does, and I love the line where Irving says, when he says, I just took people and dropped them off. I didn't ask. I didn't know what happened to them. And, he finally says the thing we're all thinking. He goes, is that what this is?
Is that what today is? I love just the way words can be selected. It's like, if he had just said, is that what this is? That's a good line. Is that what today is? It's just a slightly different way to phrase it. And much like everything on Severance, it's just a little bit more off than you'd expect it to be.
Yeah. And for a second, did you think, are they going to walk him out in the woods and there's going to be a Miller's Crossing moment in this?
it occurred to me, and there was two reasons I knew they weren't going to do it. Or one and a half reason, because then I could see a way to direct to be really interesting, and then it would be really horrifying. Number one, we already kind of had a bit of a walking in the woods moment with Irving and Milchick in the Wells Hollow episode. And then I kept thinking, what about the dog?
Right.
And then all of a sudden I had an idea what you could do with the dog. Like, oh, no, 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 no. You'd lose the audience with that one. Unless he just took the dog, like Sugar in that other show, which I'm going to talk to you about a little later. I guessed it. I've been saying it the whole season. I was half joking, turned out to be right. Anyway, red leader, stay on track. So let's get to the train station. And that's where the reveal is that he's getting him tickets. And basically take the train, as long as this train goes, take it to wherever. Just don't let him know where you're going. And you can never come back. You can never come back to Kier. And then I love the reveal, which and brings it together about Bert's character. Again, what we had said about the dinner party and what he was talking about in the car here. And he said something along the lines of asking why he had gotten severed. And I don't know if I have the exact lines here, so there might be some paraphrasing. I hope I didn't. He said something along the lines of, I liked the idea that I could be innocent again, part of me. But then his innocent part fell in love with him.
Right. And there's a touchingness to Irving's slight defiance of him throughout this. He doesn't go out as a total wimp. And here, he's even brave in the face of rejection. And I like that a lot. Like I like that here are these two men. It's funny, they're in this whole train station where there could be a bunch of people, but apparently there aren't. There are some people there. There are people. Yeah. We do actually see people here. It's not like the diners and such, but professing him and Irving gives his last pitch and says heartbreakingly, I've never felt love before. I've never been in love before, and begs him to try in a real touching way. But I think we see here Outie Bert is going to stay true to Fields and just can't cross this bridge here. But there is something to the idea that the attraction between these two people, the chemistry, regardless of any Outie, translated. And as much as Bert may see that, at least he has the morals to not, run off and leave his husband. And he's not as torn as Irving is, it seems. We may find out later that's not accurate, but really sad. And he watches him leave, and they really focused on that door. And when the door shut, that they lingered on that shot to, I think, say, that relationship's over.
Rewinding it back a couple minutes, it's also interesting to note that a lot of the interaction we have here, it's like a parallel and yet opposite to what had happened between them as innies, as far as a moment of intimacy, of anything that would even come close to consummating anything. And we're not talking about sex. We're talking about just an actual kiss. And there's that they keep repeating the same line back to each other. Irving keeps saying, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. That's what he's referring to, because he was the one who was reticent and backed off. The innie version of him did. But here, Bert is saying, we can't. He's the one who's, stopping it. And right. As opposed to, he was the one pushing for it when they were innies. It does go to, despite what Bert has done in his past and what clearly Lumen sent him to do once again, Bert, with him going through severance and everything else, and what we heard, the conversation with his, with Fields, I guess is his husband. I think they're supposed to be married. He's trying to reclaim part of his soul.
Right.
That was the point of him doing the severance thing. If he runs away with Irving here, that's gone. Yes,
Right.
you can say it's all about love, whatever. Yeah, but there's this thing called adultery. There's cheating.
Right.
There's commitments and promises, and you're you do love this other person also. So it's no. I never would have expected when this show came on and we started watching it that the relationship and characters that would deal the most with the issues of actual love and emotions, and what would end up being John Turturro and Christopher Walken.
Right.
never
Right.
occurred to me.
It's pretty crazy, and I have to say it's cool that the train station lets you have a dog, and it's cool that the dog can ride on the train with him. He gets to take his dog.
Right.
Um, and as he gets on the train and heads out, we have that sort of flash to a black hallway, which makes me think, even if it's just a connective tissue to another story, it's telling you Irving's story probably isn't over. And just for a fan note, that train station was Union Station in Utica, New York, in case anyone's interested in where they filmed that.
I mean, we have to expect we're going to be dealing with Irving once again, whether it be in the next episode or the next season. Um, Not just because I do not believe they're going to be writing John Turturro out of this show anytime soon, but as mentioned earlier, we have yet to have gotten an explanation for Irving. His past dealings with Lumen, his original reason for severing. All these things remain a mystery. Um, Unlike like everyone else from MDR, quite frankly. So I think there's still a lot of story to be mined there, and we either we get it in the next episode or not. It's debatable only because he got put on a train, but you don't know 5 minutes later if he got off that train.
Well, it is, and I'll just put a bow on this section by saying there's a couple of hints here that maybe he is reintegrated, that he has some memory of the things with him and Bert, the way that you wonder how his outie would know or be able to perfectly mirror some of those things from inside to try to use the words they'd used before. Um, and this may be, you can quibble with me about it, but there's a very specific way, they always refer to people. And if they wanted to get rid of him, Helly refers to him as we're going to take care of the bailiff thing. She doesn't say, we're going to take care of the Irving B thing. Um, they want the outie him gone too, which makes me think that they're as afraid of what his outer self knows as to what his inner self knows. And there's after seeing the notebook and the notes he's taken, the things he's written, it does make you wonder if there's been a reintegration with him that's been there all along.
Yeah, I mean, how else to explain his memory? But again, I think a lot of it will go into when we find out about his past, because it's my expectation that most, if not all, you know what? I'm just going to say it because I don't want to, hedging is pointless. It's my assumption that all the information he has, he was when he was a Lumen employee, but a non-severed employee, and he kept track of all this stuff, who people were, where they were, what they were doing. The expectation, based on even the little bit of notes that we hear Bert reading, is he was someone who was involved in Lumen, and then he became aware of the things that they were doing, and he started keeping track of things and keeping notes on things, whatever. Now, his choice to become a severed employee, and then we also know that he was trying to get messages to his severed employee, and how he did that, even if it was by lack of sleep, quite frankly,
Right.
but clearly had some impact there. The thing that also the thing that we never got to find out. So another reason we know we haven't. There's no way we've seen the last of Irving. We have not been told who he was speaking to on the phone.
That's right.
We've had theories about it, but it may very well be that we have not seen or met the person or persons he's talked to as of yet.
That's right.
So I think that's all. These are all things I think will be part of the storylines that, again, they might be touching on them in the finale. We don't know. I only know two things about the finale. It's going to be really long, and there are hot, heavy rumors. It's going to be kind of violent. I'm hearing violence. I'm hearing there was a rating situation when they preview episodes when they're shown in other countries, and that it got like a high violence rating. So maybe some gore coming our way. By the way, it didn't occur to me until like after we finished our previous podcast when you had talked about the you caught the details about the school
Mm-hmm.
that
The
that
fight.
Harmony had come fighting kids. It didn't hit me until after we finished the podcast when you said fighting kids. I went, oh, kids, as in baby goats.
Yep.
I was just thinking kids,
Right.
especially with all the child labor going on there. Although it is funny because you got kids and you got kids. You know, both are inappropriate. Way to go, Lumen. Anyway, let's get to Dylan. Either it be Outie Dylan, Dylan George to be more specific, or any Dylan, Dylan G. And along with the letter G, we might as well be including Gretchen in the mix here. So early on in the episode, we get a scene between the Outie Dylan, Dylan George, and Gretchen. And also the reminder when we see the uniform she's wearing that she's actually a paramedic. And she chooses to confess. And the whole situation is all about how the innie reminds her of how he used to be. It's pretty much what we thought, whatever. And I think, as we would have expected, he does not take it well.
No, he doesn't take it well at all, and he's already been defeated on the outside, as we've seen his failed attempt to find other work, and feels like less of a man. And I think this is another blow to his ego, and he gets really angry.
I mean, the only success he seems to be having is his decision to go with Severance, because this other version of him has been apparently successful at his job. And now the fact that his wife is doing this, essentially cheating on him, and we'll talk about that in a bit, the very idea that he would threaten to quit to stop it from happening, because that would essentially, end Dylan G's existence, would also be a supremely spiteful action, because, well, then what do you do? Because you have proven, we've seen that you have been unable to get a job on the outside world.
Yeah, and she really scores the emotional blow on him at the end of this conversation, where she says, like, he reminds me of how you used to be. And as he leaves, her being upset and explaining to him why, basically it's the reverse of that is like, he reminds me of what I loved about you, and maybe I don't love you as much as I used to. That's sort of the corollary of that, and that's a pretty hard thing to hear. But kudos to her. And another thing, we wonder, how long will they keep a secret? How long will they drag a storyline on? She tells him pretty quick.
Later, she does go to see the any version of Dylan, and she goes the confessional route once again, this time with any Dylan. She tells him that she told the other version of him. And that's when you realize, as snarky and as cynical as Dylan G has proven to be in the past, there's still kind of a wonderful naivete about him, either the way he reacted to the outside world in a previous episode, or here, one of his first things he asks is he glad for us? Of course he's not. And the way this scene goes on, it's brutal. It's brutal to watch, man. When he drops to his knees to essentially, it's like he's proposing to her all over again, except he made her a little ring out of, I don't know, probably the Chinese paper torture things that they have or something.
Yeah, it's brutal. And he says those things that you imagine a teenage starry-eyed dreamer would say. My life started when you came here. And I mean, kudos to Zach Cherry. The yell he gives her at the end, where his voice goes up like 3 octaves, it's so powerful. I mean, that got to Irving and Bert hurt me, but it was sad. But the way he yelled, the pain in his voice, was just brutal.
Before we get into the rest of Dylan stuff, where it becomes increasingly acidic and dour, right here, we're playing with a rather unique and odd situation that Severance has come up with here. The concept of cheating on your spouse with your spouse. In this case, he or she just doesn't know it until you've told them. Now, with her, you wonder, was it the guilt that kept her from telling him about seeing his innie in the first place? Putting aside that nothing actually was, again, I'm going to use the word consummated beyond a minute-long kiss, it's still hard not to say it's cheating. Because the two outies involved are certainly acting and believe it to be. It's interesting to note that the weight of what would amount to adulterous behavior does not impact the innie Dylan one iota. Because
No,
he sees himself as being the one to essentially rescue Gretchen from her apparently humdrum life. Because he believes that she clearly and truly isn't being appreciated by the outie version of Dylan.
I was listening to Damon Lindelof talk about this show,
Oh,
and
wow.
he said this idea of like, we've went with this show from the idea of a love triangle to a love square for there's 4 parts. And he said, I haven't seen anybody do that before. And it's so rare that you see a new novel take on something that breathes fresh life into it. Um, and no matter whether it's a triangle or a square, someone always gets left out.
Right.
And Outie Dillon's, on the outside of this square, and it's really, really, really painful. But watching this, I had 2 thoughts that are addressed later in the episode, so I'll save those. But I'll just say maybe this wasn't the best idea.
So next time we see Dylan, he's with Helly, who, by the way, spoiler for the podcast, she'll be next on our little storyline rundown here, don't you know? But here, she does try to console Dylan G. But she also tries to remind him about the clear line of distinction between the innies and the outies. I mean, she says point blank, she's not your wife. Now, the interesting thing with Helly's involvement in this storyline, because the more she speaks, the more to me, it's clear that Helly is, she's back to raising hell about the outies again. And she really wants to shift the conversation and the focus back to that black hallway that they've heard about, that map, the map that Irving left and Dylan found and put back. But Dylan G doesn't want to hear it. That's when he starts to spout things at her, that he actually blames her, for what's happened. And that part where he points out, if we're so different, how come we couldn't tell when you were gone? And when she says Irving could, and he hits her with Mark couldn't.
Oh yeah,
because he knows full. I mean, I think pretty much everyone knows what happened between her and Mark. And again, he was in the tent next door. I'm pretty sure he knew that night.
And he does it in a way that's dickish, but not too dickish. Like he's pointing out to her, you're trying to make me feel better, but you're ignoring the hypocrisy of what you're saying, and pointing it out in a very effective way.
Because that is a really rough rebuke from Dylan to begin with. Now, I'll confess, speaking for myself, watching this episode and where we're at this point, because I think time-wise, I think this is roughly midway through the episode, somewhere around there. I will confess, I was actually having a moderate level of confusion between Helena and Helly R. And I don't know if it's because Helena was spending too much time in the Helly R outfits, I don't. And then I started thinking, oh, maybe there's something happening like the way we were viewing Mark S and Mark Scout. And I'm talking about before the reintegration process started, where you have two sides are starting to bleed into one another. And maybe they're just simply more alike than either of those versions would like to admit. But when we get past the scene, one of the things I noticed about this episode, especially with these specific storylines, as it progresses further in the episode, with maybe a couple exceptions, and there's a reason for those exceptions, we start getting quicker cuts. They're even constituting even like single shots as we bounce from one story thread to another. Now, one of them is with Dylan G, where he's just walking and standing in one of the typically white corridors, and he just says, "Fuck this place." And you realize he's come to a decision, and then we see shortly thereafter the decision is he's filling out a resignation form.
Yes, and this scene beautifully resembles last season, except instead of Cobell and Milchek, it's Milchek and Wong. And instead of Helly barging in and demanding to resign, and Cobell being cold and Milchek being, tender, more tender, that now it's switched and Milchek's the stone cold. And we see Miss Wong for the first time really show some empathy.
Because during the scene, you have that happening, and you also have Milchek rather, I would say, testily, but always Milchek politely expressing his disappointment in this. But he, the way he just very tersely, demands, the key card. The way Huang says it is Miss Huang's probably one of her few empathetic moments.
Probably from her standpoint, she sees this as a death, like he's leaving and he's never coming back. That severed person's gone forever.
Right. And let's be clear, just because Dylan G, he's filling out this form and he's going to be riding that elevator, which in his mind is he's essentially killing himself.
Right.
As if, because if this comes to pass, he will cease to exist. The question is, even though Audi Dylan had literally threatened to quit the job earlier in the episode, which would accomplish the same thing, erase him from existence, doesn't one think it's more likely now that Audi Dylan wouldn't want to honor the wishes of his innie, that he may actually want to keep the job specifically to punish him, as well as, well, even more importantly, perhaps, continue to collect a paycheck?
Right.
So that's why I can't imagine it's the last we're going to see of him, because why would the Audi go along with it?
You spelled out perfectly. The guy who did this to you, you can deny what he wants and he goes and earns your money for you. Like, I mean, it's pretty diabolical, really.
Oh yeah, it's perfect. So we mentioned both Helly and Milchek in that little Dylan section we just went through. So as I had mentioned earlier, we're going to go ladies first between those two and bounce back to the beginning of this episode, which started with, well, it certainly seemed to be Helena. Although after she finished swimming, she was already in her Helly wear. Now, I'm not saying it's relevant. It probably isn't. But I'm a person, when I watch television, especially when I'm watching something in the wee hours of the night, I tend to leave the closed captioning on. But that could have been just some, faceless cog in, the Apple TV workings. Because when she was speaking and talking to, Jamie Egan in that scene, closed caption was identifying her as Helly, not Helena.
Have that note too.
Oh. So I did find that curious. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of, oh, she's swimming and look how symbolic water is in this series and whatever. But I feel like we've kind of touched on that before. I know you certainly have. It's like, I feel like at this point, like, yeah, we get it. Okay.
It's a lot of water in this
series. Hey, look at this. Hey, look, there's the water tower. Which already intimates, like, do they control the water for the town? I'm pretty sure they control everything for the town. So yes, right. Yeah, right. We get it. Also, it did make me wonder something silly. I could have saved it for our opening for next week. If Helena knows how to swim, does Helly know how to swim?
That's a good question. I mean, you would think so, but we've wondered in the past, if your Audi knows how to drive a car, does your innie know how to drive a car? We don't know.
Well, we saw that episode when Irving was driving, but it seemed like he barely knew what he was doing.
Right.
It seemed like a kid getting behind the wheel, and I imagine this is how it works. And luckily it wasn't a stick shift, because I come across those, even though these cars all being
particularly a gear
best. But with all these cars being at least 40 to 50 years old, maybe they would run across a stick. I was also trying to pay attention, because they show Helena walking, and there's an extended moment of her walking, and I wanted to try to pay attention to see if I could tell the difference between how Helly and Helena walks. And I feel like we've talked about that. I think there's even a thing that's how she carries herself, because she's the one character you're kind of looking for that for, especially since she's posed. They've posed as one another a few times, and it's probably going to happen again. So I always think but they both have kind of a very forthright kind of walk right now. Or maybe their walks are going to be more similar since they're becoming more similar to each other, perhaps.
Right.
So You had meant. I like that you had mentioned the whole thing where they refer to bailiff in the conversation. She does say Mister Bailiff, which is
He does.
so she again does courtesy is a big thing if you're Illuminati. Um, but I'll also admit that it took me more than a minute to remember that Irving's last name was actually Bailiff because like I also forgot that Dylan's last name was George. To be honest with you, so only because their names aren't mentioned over and over again.
Right.
And we still don't have an explanation why Helly went with R for Helly R. But I have a theory. It's after the dog Radar. No, I'm just kidding. So, do you think where they're located, this clearly must be close to where they had the Ortbo? Is Ort? I am saying it right?
Yeah, it sure looks like it. It sure looks like they're real close to where the Ortbo would be because we see at the end of the shot we do see a body of water there next to this property. But
Oh, there's more water.
what a beautiful swimming pool to be able to swim in a you know beautiful pool while there's frozen white winter all around you. So I mean, obviously they're super wealthy. The design of the room where she eats breakfast with James is, it's odd. The chairs have odd design. The plate she eats off of is basically two people like holding down a child.
The plate, first of all, that plate. I know I have no notes on this. I'm just remembering about this because it's hard not to remember that plate. um, yeah, it's basically it's two women holding down what appears to be a child, or at least definitely a younger male figure. Now, obviously, you have a storyline in this show where say you have Mark in between. Could it be Helly and Helena? Could it be Gemma and Helena? Jemmy and Helly? Like talk about love squares and love like have we figured out the number of points that the Mark Helly Gemma thing would take up? Because I think we're dealing with at least 6 or 7 or 8 of there. I don't. It's like an octopus, but a creepy ass plate like that, which no normal human being would ever want to eat off of. And then the way she eats is so very weird and precise. And then what he says to her, what her father says to her about how he wished that she would take them raw. Now, I had forgotten, I had to read something and then it came up like, oh, that I guess in an earlier episode, it is referenced how that's the way he eats. I will confess, I had not remembered that. Because my first note, like, why would you say something like that? Then I read like, oh, there was an earlier episode that actually referenced the way he eats eggs. So he's actually saying he wished that she ate eggs the way he did.
Right. He wants everything to be like him. I mean, he thinks of himself as a god. But the sort of the thing that moves this episode as we start is that it's announced this is supposed to be the momentous day that we heard about. And, that's why they're talking today's going to be the day. There's expectation for this day. And at the end, she's driven off and we see this estate with the water tower. I think to give it a sense of place that it's not super far from Lumen, because if you remember in the orientation video, that water tower was shown not far from the headquarters.
Yeah, that's how they could have their conversations.
Right. Exactly. So, and then again, this week we have at the conclusion of this scene, we have the regular title sequence we didn't have last week.
Right, that's true. And so later in the episode, I mean, we do briefly for a not split second, but for a few seconds, we do see Helly appear on the severed floor. But more importantly, the next significant scene with her is one of the highlights of the episode, I would say. We get a scene between Helly and Milchick. This is one of those, put a star next to it kind of scenes, because I just love this scene so much. There's a few scenes in the episode which now, to be clear, I think we both really liked the Irving and Bert stuff, and we both really liked the Dylan stuff. But the stuff that kind of made you kind of like shake your fist, like, yeah, are going to be a couple of things that we'll be mentioning from this point on.
Oh, yeah.
We like the snark. And Helly really brings it here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, when she says shouldn't it be Helly E? Like I mean she calls his bullshit immediately. And the best line, I mean, it's the kind of line that I think is so popular because all of us have wanted to say it, and she actually says it. But she's backstopped by the fact that her Audi is his boss, so she can get away with. But when he goes, that would be insubordination. She goes, "Yep, that's right." It's like, and the way that she handles him here, um, and it's funny because he is trying to redirect her to the Lumen way of doing things, but she's clearly upset about Mark as a person. And he's trying to redirect her to Mark as her supervisor. And she's not having any of it.
Oh, the moment when he references the fact that Dylan and technically is going to be filling in for Mark as a supervisor, and she unleashes that comparison between that happening to Cobell and Milchick.
Yeah.
It's the way it registers on him. That's a super low blow, especially because he knows exactly how Cobell is looked at. Whatever. Although I do wonder if he knows the truth about her. I'm inclined to think he doesn't. I don't think he would know that.
I don't think she's told anyone until now. And I did check something. And if you saw this and you disagree with me, fine. But I watched the opening credit very, very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Her dresses and her outfits are all very similar.
Right.
They're not always the same, but the color she's wearing in this episode is the color of the figure in the title episode when it shows her in the elevator.
In the elevator at the end.
Yep, it's the same color scheme, the same color dress and skirt she has on in the opening sequence.
Well, that's because probably what we see her right now, and we're going to see her on the elevator in the last episode. They just basically spoiled everything.
Yep.
Way to go, Severance. No, just kidding. So, later we do see Helly goes and, is after the scene with Dylan that we've already spoken about. She goes to get that little map that Irving had had written the directions for. Now, here's a question. Later on, we see her and she's memorizing the directions. So here's the question. And it'll look like, and by the way, you're shaking your head. I believe you have an answer. Some have asked, why is she memorizing directions instead of just immediately following them?
Because she has to leave the map behind in case someone needs to find her. Like if she takes it and is captured,
right, then it's gone. Right.
It's gone. Like she has to leave it behind. But I did like as she was memorizing it, it reminded me of like the old video game codes, like where you would cheat at Nintendo.
Jeez.
And you'd go like left, right, up, down, left, left. She was working out the directions and trying to remember them. And she very intentionally slides them under the keyboard, when she's startled by him.
Right.
And I would have loved just for a second to stay there, but I think they nailed it, the cut, because basically when James appears, and it's sort of shocking to see him on that floor.
Yes, it is.
It's shocking to see him step out of the shadow, but she's staying after hours, memorizing the map. He appears and says, like, "You tricked me, my Helly." And she says, "What the fuck?" like she's shocked. Now, the question, a lot of people are asking is, what does that mean? You tricked me, my Helly. Now, I'm flipping that one to you. I answered the last one, gave my opinion. Well, I have an opinion about what that means. What do you think that meant?
Helly, I surmise Helly has always been his nickname for his daughter. Now, the way Helena has spoken about the innies, one would naturally assume that's how she was brought up to think of the whole idea. Where else would that have come from? But her father,
right,
who views these innies as less than people. So when he shows up here and he's saying, "You tricked me," I think it's I'm gonna go. I'm gonna until I'm shown otherwise. I'm just gonna go for the plain explanation because what is it? What does Holmes says sometimes the most obvious explanation? Oh, obvious,
Razor.
right? Exactly. Occam's razor is Jamie Egan thinks he's really thinks he's a know-it-all about all this, and as he should. And the fact that even momentarily that he would have been deceived by this other version of his daughter, pretending to be his daughter, you know, still, I mean, he did have his fetid moppet moment, but he had it with he had it with Helena. This is the one he should have been having the conversation with because this is the one who tricked him.
Right.
Now, why he's choosing this moment in time to show up there and say this, that's a curiosity, especially as we know this is the day where things were supposed to be happening. See, that I don't have a great explanation for why he's doing this now, why he hadn't done that before. What inspired him to confront this version of her now? That I don't have a great explanation for.
I think it's the end of the workday and the thing didn't happen. And probably the fact that Drummond is mad and riding Milchek and things are happening. He's upset for why it didn't happen. And he may have learned about the switcheroo at the end of last season. I tend to believe that he has just discovered he was tricked at the end of last year.
Oh, wait a minute. I just realized something. We also, I mean, I don't know if it connects to him saying, well, you tricked me, but did they not make a point of saying when the whole thing came out at Woe's Hollow that they were not going to tell him?
Exactly. And I think they weren't going to tell him. Drummond says that to Milchek. And I think he finds out, realizes he was tricked, that there's this stuff going on, and the day some stuff was supposed to happen, it didn't happen, and that Mark S. has been distracted from his job.
Wait a second.
Because of the relationship.
Wait a second. We now realizing it's possible that he didn't know about what had happened at the end of last season.
Yeah.
So when he calls Helena a fetid moppet there, it's because he thought that was her saying these things. And then that what she says in the apology video, he actually took as truth.
Yes.
And now he found out, and that's what, you know what? That all makes a lot more sense now.
That's what I think. I think.
Okay, got it. Yep, that does make sense to me.
He's a scary guy, and I think they've hit it all from him.
I think you're absolutely right on that. Alrighty then. So, once again, we've referenced Milchek and Miss Huang in the Dylan segment, and now we mentioned him again in the Helena section. So let's take a look at what's left with Milchek and his fellow Illuminazis, or whatever cute name we want to call him in this episode. Because we're not just going to talk about Milchek. There's Miss Huang, there's Mr. Drummond. We might even have a smidge of a creepy doctor in his one. So let's get to those guys. Now, if there's a visual gag that never seems to go away, it's having two people at opposite ends of a long table. From Citizen Kane, Network, Batman, it's certainly not the first time they've done it on this show. Because we have that scene. The first scene is with Miss Huang seated across the room from Milchek. Oh, we find out Miss Huang's first name. They love being interesting with names on the show. Eustace.
Yep. Eustace meaning steadfast and fruitful.
So we find out she has reached the end of her Wintertide fellowship there, and then we learn, and Milchek is saying this, and you can tell there's just a little bit of satisfaction as he's saying these things to her, because he's probably most happy to be rid of her, that her bed and the rest of her life is about to be relocated to the Gunnel Egan Empathy Center in Svalbard, where she will be helping to steward global reforms. Now, did Milchek himself play any part in her getting booted out of the U.S. and ending up in, part of Norway? A part where you not only can see the northern lights, but you can experience the 24 hours of sunlight. Because it does kind of sort of feel a little bit like a banishment.
Well, and it's a perfect representation of an innie or an outie. It's 24 hours of sun, 24 hours of dark. I mean, there's a duality to it. And interestingly enough, in my research, and you guys know I do the research for you, Svalbard, Norway is inside the Arctic Circle and is composed of an archipelago, Scott, of can you guess how many islands?
6?
9.
Oh, 9. Right.
Imagine that, 9 islands. It's also the home of something you may have heard of but didn't know was there. It's the home of the global seed vault, where important seeds are stored in case of natural disaster or nuclear war. In the event that humanity has to, grow food in the future, it's.
Oh, well, that kind of seed. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
I thought it was like some universal
not
sperm
the
bank or
birthing
something.
cabin seed.
Oh,
Okay,
okay,
we're not
got it.
talking about that.
Oh, well, that would be just as appropriate for this series.
It would. But there is something I want to point out about the beginning. I think he says one word that is the theme of this episode. When he tells her to pull the thing off, he says unveil. And that's what this whole episode's about. It's about Bert unveiling who he is to Irving. It's about, it's about Gretchen unveiling to Dylan everything that happened. It's about the veil being pulled off Jamie Egan's eyes. And it's going to be about Mark S. learning the next episode, but clearly is going to end up in this place. But he says unveil and then I found this both funny and rather cruel that he makes her destroy her ring toss game because we've noticed it and commented on it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, the ring toss game is interesting because it's also symbolic of something he had said in a previous episode about, and it was one of his more florid uses of words, which is probably the kind of thing that got him written up in the first place about his tendency to use big words. I can't remember the word, something about abandoning childish folly, which he then eventually reduced down to grow up.
Yeah.
And that's what he's basically saying to her, that she's going to have to sacrifice because it's a child's game.
Right.
So she uses, and the symbolism of actually using the bust of, is it
Jamie Egan?
Is Jamie Egan, right? It's the same bust that we saw that,
Cobell had
in the root cellar thing, whatever the heck it was. So you've got some symbolism there, especially when she continues to smash it, because we get we get that Severance Lumen thing of they'll just keep making someone repeat something, doing it again. Here, he keeps saying again, again, again. And by her smashing it down over and over, she's smashing that little Kier figure. So it's interesting that it's a figure of Kier, that this large mass of Jamie Egan is being used to smash that. And you wonder if there's something going on where they're trying to make a point about the hierarchy of Lumen and what the old belief system was, and maybe if they're moving into a different direction and hence them destroying a little figure of Kier that way.
Right. Exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I love the actress in this, the Miss Wong actress. I thought she did a great job this episode. In the past, she's acted old beyond her years. In this episode, she acted like a little kid. Like you really saw the child in her in a lot of great ways throughout this episode.
She kept reminding me of Irving's dog for some reason. That must have been his sad eyes. Later, there's a moment in the episode where we're briefly in that weird room that parallels the MDR room where those 1001 cables ran to, where we knew that they were being watched. And we see there's just one person sitting there. It's Dr. Maurer. But here, he's not watching what's going on in MDR. Because, by the way, does anyone ever work at MDR anymore? Why aren't people a lot more upset? Because I can't remember the last time anyone was actually sitting there doing anything, quite frankly. But he's not watching them. He's watching Gemma in her room. And the way she looks rather despondent, like she's almost given up. And then we see on screen the stats for Cold Harbor. And the one we're going to zero in on is the one that he's zeroing in on, the fact they're at 96%. But the numbers aren't moving. Well, we know why they're not moving, because there's no one, Mark S is not there to do the job, because you're sitting at the computer, which would normally be watching Mark S, which leads to that little conversation between Drummond on the phone with Milchick, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, basically saying, get him here today. Like, get him here. The numbers aren't moving. Basically the quota was supposed to be met today.
Right. So we have the phone conversation, which then leads to an in-person conversation. Oh, by the way, now we were just talking about how we love the scene between Milchick and Hallie. We might like this scene even more.
I can say the online reaction to this scene,
so good,
and the love for Trammell Tillman as Mr. Milchick, his performance in this scene, chef's kiss. Mwah.
Oh, there's a great little meme gag with the line he has in this one, and you can imagine. We'll get to it in a moment. So you have Drummond going, so this is tightening the leash, our most vital refiner missing in the wind, and what was to be Lumen's finest. This is your fault. Before we get into Milchick's response, I feel it's incumbent on me to point out that in this episode, multiple people are told it's their fault for things.
Yeah.
You notice that seems to be a running thing. It's your fault. I've just noticed that happen. Because it happened with the Dylan and Gretchen stuff, and then Dylan says it to Hallie, and then it's interesting.
Well, that's sort of a commentary on culture, corporate culture. It's never my fault. It's always someone else's.
So, Mr. Milchick's initial response is he's pointing out how, he's followed protocol. I thank you for your remonstration.
Yep. And guess what?
He used a complex word for a simple idea. Apologize for the word.
Right. Well, the sort of the racism inherent in this is there, go through the Lumen handbook and the stuff they call things that, a big word's fine, but not from him. And finally, he's had enough.
Right. And I believe this is what leads to him finally saying to devour feculence.
Yes.
It means eat shit, Mr. Drummond.
Now, for a second, the way that shot was framed, and they're standing on that, walkway with sort of the open floor plan, looking out over the lobby, and they're a few floors up. For a second, did you think like somebody might go over that railing?
Yeah, for a second, I thought this was a scene from Paradise where they're going to jump into it. Except, wait, no, this is actually well written. Anyway, So this is all about, owing him a measure of respect. And he points out that he's not responsible for what happens beyond the severed floor. If someone's to blame, it's not him. It's Mr. Drummond and the rest of Lumen. And as he says, to put it monosyllabically,
right,
it's not his fault. And it's for a guy who, again, he's not a hero. He still kind of falls on the villain side, but we're still kind of rooting for him. We still think there's a chance he may come through for us. Those of us who identify with those, certain characters, I guess.
He may not be a hero, but he may kill another bad guy at some point, and we may like it.
Yes, we'll still get great satisfaction out of that.
Yeah, and then to sort of put the finishing touches as this is happening, we see Miss Wong standing out front, with her little bag and the bus pulling up to pick her up. And I felt kind of sad. She looked like a school kid going home after school.
No, it was a little short bus too. So
yep.
And then you're thinking, is this the last time we're going to see her?
Right.
Which it may very well be. I mean, hey, we thought we were going to get to see those people who showed up in the very first episode. And, you went out and got, Bob Balaban and, Ali Sharbat and whatever. And it's like, nope, never showed up again.
That's right. So,
which this all brings us to the final storyline that needs to be discussed. kind of a big one. It's the one headlined by Mark Scout with an understudy named Devon and a special guest appearance by Harmony. So in an early scene, we see that Mark is still out of it and he's being driven by Devon. And again, no matter what condition he's in or what mood Devon's in, the constant little fun sniping between brother and sister still lives on. When one of his first things he says as he's again coming out of his fog is, "Oh, it's a smelly fucking car."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, she's checking his orientation to time, place, person, and he's there enough that she's not that concerned.
Right. Now at this point, we understand what's happened already. We know we get the sense, okay, they're going to meet Harmony. And based on the condition he's in, if he agreed to it, I don't, because we did hear him speak to her briefly in the previous episode, but you wonder how much in control of his own, faculties he was at that point. Because here he's saying, this is a mistake. Yeah, we told her everything. She hadn't told us. She told us shit. You can't trust her. And
Right. I love this version of Mark, like the version of Mark that is fired up and sarcastic and not putting up with any crap. I love this version of him. And when he gets there and unleashes on Cobell, it's just wonderful.
it's the next scene with a big fat star next to it. When Harmony doing her thing where she's like, "How are you?"
Yeah.
And it's like, now, it's him saying "so good." The "so good" is what makes everything after it work so well. If you don't say that, it's okay. When he goes into, "My wife's been being held prisoner in Lumen, and I just got brain surgery in my basement. How have you been?"
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good.
But it's "so good."
Yeah. Great. Great. I mean, this episode has, several banger lines, and that was one of them.
And you get the back and forth between the two of them because now last time they ran into each other, I think is when she was in the car and he was demanding to know about whether his wife was alive or not. And she just kind of ends up screaming and almost running him over before she drives out of town. But here they had the whole back and forth about, how they're allies or it's like, "Oh, I thought we were neighbors."
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good, so good. But the practicality of this comes out because there's sort of a shocking turn when Cobell is trying to get something out of him, and he doesn't seem fully integrated because he's not picking up on what she says. And basically, what this conversation consists of is her trying to see if Cold Harbor is done. That what does he know about that? And I think we've mentioned what does Cold Harbor mean, and I think Miss Cobell here pretty much confirms if Cold Harbor is over, Jim is dead.
Yes, right. So it's during this conversation, yeah, because I mentioned the file, I mentioned Cold Harbor. This is when she's instructing him to call Milchick and tell him that he's unwell. You have Mark and Devin arguing about doing that, whatever. And then they realize they got to do it for Gemma. I thought the interesting thing buried within this and where they're going to end up going is that they're going back to the birthing cabin. So I'm trying to remember now because I didn't do any kind of rewatch. I know that at the end of last season, when they switch, when Innie Mark is in the Audi world, he appears there. That's where he essentially appears, right? Or no, he appears at their home. He appears at
the home of Devin and Rickon.
Okay. So my question is, why do they specifically have to go to the birthing cabin in order for this, what presumably is going to be a switch again to happen? Or is that one of the portals, for that to happen? And that's why.
I think that they go there because it's a portal to trigger Severance. And Devin learned that from the senator's wife.
Right. Of course. Yeah, that makes sense. Right. Because that's why she didn't.
That's how she didn't remember different. The pregnancy and all that. So they know if they go there, it can trigger his chip and his innie could come out. And so I I would like to add there's a beautiful scene in the middle of this and just talk about it for a minute. But when Mark calls Milchick,
Oh yeah, I'm not skipping that scene at all. I was just asking a
oh, okay.
question.
Okay. Well, in my notes, I want to make sure we picked it
Oh,
up, but I think
that's
that's why they're headed there.
yeah, that's my next thing, man.
Okay. Awesome.
That's because
Awesome.
that's one of my star scenes.
There you go.
Um, because they do a thing in that scene which I think is very interesting when you don't see it too often, and I always like to imagine the thought of when you write a scene like that. So she does advise him to call Milchick. He initially is reluctant, doesn't want to do it, but eventually he does. And we come back and he's calling Milchick. And obviously, this is after Milchick has already been spoken to by Mr. Drummond. This is post eat shit and all that sort of stuff. And Milchick is initially trying to convince him to come in. And Mark is initially kind of just lying. And then Mark, it's not that he's not lying, but he's a little bit more honest about it. He's a little bit more honest about it. And there's that long period where Milchick doesn't say anything. And I thought that was an amazing choice. I'd like to see the printed page of the script and how they have that written. I'm very curious about it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's beautiful because he's looking at that picture of an iceberg. And the iceberg is 10% visible and 90% invisible under the water.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the perfect representation in that moment of Milchick. He has all these things going on inside him. And Mark's confession, if you will, of just being the one person that Milchick feels like he's not trying to bullshit me in this moment. He's just telling me the truth. Like it just sort of touches him and riles up his emotions, and he gives Mark till tomorrow.
It's a great little scene between the two of them. And it's quite the contrast between one of the last times we saw a version of Mark and Milchick interact, which would have been in that elevator that time. This almost plays almost the opposite of that scene, quite frankly.
So,
which I guess it would be another theme for the episode of like we're echoing earlier scenes, but now they play in a totally opposite fashion. Later, we do see as it reaches dusk that they hide Mark in the back of the truck, much the way Harmony was hidden in the back of the truck in that earlier episode. And with nightfall, they go to the birthing cottage compound. Now we have Harmony talking to the security guard there. And after a little bit of back and forth, which features a kind of a detail, and you wonder how creepy the detail is when she makes a reference to Devin being one of Jamie's women, and you start going, wait, what are we talking? Is Jamie Egan like impregnating, various women? Does Helena have a whole bunch of sisters that she don't, or half sisters that she don't know about? It is a very culty thing.
Very cult. Does Helena have a brother she doesn't know about?
That's true. Could Mark be? No, God. Anyway. Do we have a Luke and Leia thing happening here? But they already. No, they won't go there.
I'm not going to jump your thunder.
Go ahead.
Let you take the next little portion to say I'd pointed out last week that this had the same name as a Twilight Zone episode. And boy, did they make a Twilight Zone reference. And Scott, since you are the Twilight Zone expert in my world, I'll just step aside and give you the stage, sir.
The moment the conversation starts to take on an exchange of passwords between the security guard and Harmony, and I heard what they were saying, I thought of what Brian said the previous week. And I will admit to a certain level of personal consternation that I wasn't the one to point it out, being the quote-unquote Twilight Zone guy. But they're back and forth here, where they reference Miss Marcia White going to the 9th floor. Oh, the specialties department. I am looking for a gold thimble. If you've seen the Twilight Zone episode, The After Hours, which is the episode where they're mannequins, and once a month, one of the mannequins comes to life. And the episode is about the mannequin who isn't aware of that that's what she is. She doesn't know that she's not an actual person. But she finds herself kind of in the department store, even trapped to a certain extent. And one of the things she's like obsessively looking for is a gold thimble. So the fact that they lay it all out here, and that's the title of the episode, maybe it might be a good idea between now and the next episode of Severance. I'm going to tell you guys to watch The Twilight Zone on Paramount Plus or Amazon Prime or whatever, just so you can then start checking out our podcast on The Twilight Zone, because it's really good. But you know what? It might not be a bad idea to go watch that episode of Twilight Zone, the After Hours, to start to realize, why are they referencing that episode and what's the connection here? What are the parallels between mannequins and, whether you're actually alive or not, and perhaps the way innies and outies are perceived. And you start seeing, and remember, the people who put these passwords in place are the people from Lumen, or the Egans who are doing this. So this is their perspective. This is how they view it. I found that fascinating. I mean, again, I'm biased because of my love of the Twilight Zone, but when I heard those words, I'm like, oh, and then I had to take a step back. I'm like, oh, how do they view everything, and how does that tie together? I mean, obviously it does.
Well, and I think it touches on, and not to get too crossover here, but I think it touches on something we've said on the Twilight Zone podcast, and you should all listen to it, that great writers of science fiction, fantasy, even just regular television, all cite it as one of the best shows of all time. And if you want further proof, the writing on Severance is amazing. You love it. You're watching it. They're inspired by this. I mean, literally, this whole password exchange is from the opening narration of that episode. And, you can't mistake it. It's not sort of like it's that. It's the name of the episode. And it has a lot to say, not to mention that the mannequins take a different elevator than the normal people.
I get the funny feeling that you've rewatched the episode recently, Brian. Did you?
Like as say yesterday, maybe.
We're not going to get to that one in the podcast for a while.
Not for a while. Nope.
So they do eventually make their way to a cabin. And when Mark Scout enters, he becomes Mark S. We see the change happen. And she's bringing him upstairs to see Harmony. And the one line they have here, she says to him, like, what is the last thing you said to me? She is alive. I believe someone out there, or maybe many people out there, have noted that the last thing we hear in this episode is him saying she's alive. That's not the first time they ended an episode with Mark S. saying she is alive. They kind of did that last season.
And the symmetry of it is they did that at the end of episode 9.
Yeah.
Season 1. So they do at the end of episode 9, season 2, but we have one left.
We have one more to go. So last time we heard this, that was the cliffhanger of this season. And I was like, no, we got a bit more to go. In fact, we got a whole lot more to go, because the next episode is going to be not quite twice as long, but, in the ballpark. Again, as we said earlier on, it's going to be 76 minutes long. I don't know if that's including credits. Maybe it's a little shorter, but keep in mind, last week's episode was basically 37 minutes worth of content. So it's almost double that one.
Right. Well, I have one final thought about the episode. After Mark says that, there's a nonverbal look between Devin and Cobell.
Yes.
And when Mark enters the upstairs, I mean, the way they shoot that, it almost looked like something out of, one of those dragon shows, like the way they frame Harmony with all the lights above and the fire coming from behind. It was a really beautiful shot. And I'm not theorizing, and I've theorized. I'm not saying this. It's just an observation. I didn't love the way Devin looked at Harmony right before it cut. And if you watch it again, you know, I didn't love it. And I don't know if it means anything or not, but Devin seems 100% with Cobell since this has happened. And I just I want to get to next week and find out what's going on, because I love the Devin and Mark relationship, but I didn't like the look she shared with Cobell.
So now the concern has to be that an early theory of yours way back when may suddenly come to fruition, that perhaps Devin and her lame-o husband were part of this. Possibly. I will hate you if that happened. I'm not.
Well, like I say, I'm not theorizing that. I could be crazy, but watch the look and you tell me after you watch it again, so we can talk about it next week.
Alrighty then. So next week, we will be reintegrating into a single podcast for us once again to cover, as I said, the extra long and rumor has it extra violent, oh dear, season finale of Severance, titled Cold Harbor. There'll probably need to be a little bit of wrangling behind the scenes here to determine the best time that the two of us can record and release that one, because there's this other rumor that weekend also kicks off a month-long or maybe only a minute-long celebration of some schmuck's birthday. We shall see. Before that episode is recorded, no birthday jokes. Or maybe, I don't care. Before that, I will also be recording the next Twilight Zone podcast with our buddy Professor Joe. We will be covering the 7th and 8th episodes of the first season of that all-time classic TV series. Those episodes are titled The Lonely. And the other one, oh boy, get ready, because there's going to be a discussion about one of the most, some might even say the most, iconic episode in Twilight Zone history, Time Enough at Last. Now, schedule-wise, we're shooting to record that on Wednesday. I'll try to get it out either later that night or early Thursday evening before I deal with apparently yet another podcasting matter on Thursday. Should I? I guess all right, fine. I will be joining for 1 week at least the Tally the Votes podcast on the Crazy Hank Network to talk about a key juncture in the latest season of Australian Survivor, Brains versus Brawn 2. Back to our podcast here. You can find this podcast, the Serious TV Drama Podcast, on most, if not all, podcasting platforms. By the way, as I always say, if you use Apple Podcasts, I do take a shine to the folks who rate and review us there. I mean, the positive reviews, at least. You can also follow us on Instagram, on X, Twitter, and on Blue Sky. I'm sure if you just type in Serious TV Drama Podcast, you'll find us one way or the other. Sometimes you just type in STVD, you might find us. But, I wouldn't bet on it. That is all for tonight. Brian, thank you so much for joining me yet again.
Scott C., thank you.
That's right, Fred CH. And thank you, the listeners, for lending us your ears yet again. Now let's get our rears on the lift and get out of here. Good night.
Good night.